Let's see if that worked. I'm assuming maybe. Almost. I'm assuming. Okay. So that actually started. Always nice to be on top of things. Okay. So, just found this book in my library. Since I'm home from the holidays, and I finished, I have no idea what to read. This is kind of a weird time where I want to think or say anything politically cogent, but it really doesn't work. Because in Italy it's still the same thing when you feel like, what can I say? There is a weird relationship with the citizen state where citizens are very much not citizens, but sudditi. So you read something like written in 1861, and it says, guys, people in Italy have different idea what is citizenship, what is the role inside the state, because of how Italy was made and who made Italy and the component parts, let's just say. And it doesn't seem that anything changed much, in the sense that still it feels like people see it as a univocal direction. So it's either the state has to do something for me or I have to do something for the state, but it's a bidirectional issue and I don't know. And I think we are in the condition of actually producing anything with the government that we have in Italy. Nor I think we have a government that is able to govern. They are very clearly not governing anything. They are very clearly following their personal interest in being the first in a weird daily poll of who is more liked, and that is no way to govern. And it's been going on since 1944 or something like that, and it's been normalized. There is a long issue that has been normalized in Italy that should not be. So I don't think I can have anything, read anything and smart in terms of, like I was thinking Olsen and societies and the group theory of cooperation, but it doesn't work regardless, because that's higher theorizing and that's this problem and that's this limit. So basically I found a book in a library. Among the ones that I didn't read and the ones that were in English and not in Italian. Then the ones I didn't want to reread because, I still like myself some Aristotle. And this is it. So, what remains? I mean, there is an introduction, so let's keep that because it's not an introduction written by Hannah Arendt. What remains? Language remains. A conversation with Gunther Gauss. On October 28, 1964, the following conversation between Hannah Arendt and Gunther Gauss, at the time a well-known journalist and later a high official in the Willy Brandt's government, was broadcast on West German television. The interview was awarded the Adolf Grimme Prize and was published the following year under the title Was Blei es bleibt die Muttensprache. In Günter Graus, Zu Person, Munich 1965, the English translation is by Johann Stambau. Gauss begins the conversation by saying that Arendt is the first woman to take part of the series of interviews he is conducting. Then he immediately qualifies the statement by noting that she has a very masculine occupation, namely that of philosopher. This leads him to his first question. In spite of the recognition respect that she has received, does she perceive her role in the circle of philosophers as unusual or peculiar because she is a woman? Arendt replies, I'm afraid I have to protest. I do not belong to the circle of philosophers. My profession, if one can even speak of it all, is political theory. I neither feel like a philosopher nor do I believe that I have been accepted in the circle of philosophers, as you so kindly suppose. But to speak at the other question that you raised in your opening, remarks, you say that philosophy is generally thought to be a masculine occupation. It does not have to remain a masculine occupation. It is entirely possible that a woman will one day be a philosopher. I consider you to be a philosopher. This is Gauss, so I will try to be more masculine in voice when it speaks. Well, I can't help that, but in my opinion I am not. In my opinion I said goodbye to philosophy once and for all. As you know, I studied philosophy, but that does not mean I stayed with it. I should like to hear from you more precisely what the difference is between political philosophy and your work as a professor of political theory. I'm not good at male voices. Oh, voices. Arendt. The expression political philosophy, which I avoid, is extremely burdened by tradition. When I talk about these things, academically or non-academically, I always mention that there is a vital tension between philosophy and politics. That is, between man as a thinking being and man as an acting being. There is a tension that does not exist in natural philosophy, for example. Like everyone else, the philosopher can be objective with regards to nature, and when he says that what he thinks about it, he speaks in the name of all mankind. But they cannot be objective or neutral with regards to politics, not since Plato. This is a nice dig, and kudos if you get it, because it's a really nice dig. shade on Plato from like centuries later. I'm like, it's fine. Gauss, I understand what you mean. And Arendt, there is a kind of enmity against all politics in most philosophers, with very few exceptions. Kant is an exception. This enmity is extremely important for the whole problem, because it is not a personal question. It lies in the nature of the subject itself. You want not part in this enmity against politics because you believe that it would interfere with your work. I want no part in this enmity. That's it exactly. I want to look at politics, so to speak, with eyes unclouded by philosophy. I understand now. Let us turn to the question of the woman's emancipation. Has this been a problem for you? Yes, of course. There is always the problem as such. I have actually been rather old-fashioned. I always thought that there are certain occupations that are improper for women, that do not become them, and if I might put it in that way, it just doesn't look good when a woman gives orders. She should try not get into such a situation if she wants to remain feminine. Whether I'm right about this or not, I do not know. She is wrong. I myself have always lived in accordance with this more or less unconsciously, or rather say, more or less consciously. The problem itself played no role for me personally. To put it very simply, I always done what I like to do. Sweet child. She was a teacher of political theory. She had to, give orders. It does not become a woman to give orders. Some idea live us instead of us living with these ideas, and I think this is one. Gauss, your work, we will certainly go into details later, is to a significant degree concerned with the knowledge of the condition under which political action and behavior come about. Do you want to achieve extensive influence with this work, or do you believe that such influence is no longer possible in these times, or is simply not important to you? And this is not a simple question. If I'm to speak very honestly, I would say when I'm working, I'm not interested in how my work might affect people. And when you are finished, then I'm finished. What is important for me is to understand. For me, writing is a matter of seeking this understanding, part of the process of understanding. Certain ideas get formulated. If I had a good enough memory to really retain everything that I think, I doubt very much that I would have written anything. I know my own laziness. What is important to me is the thought process itself. As long as I have succeeded in thinking something through, I am personally quite satisfied. If I then succeed in expressing my thoughts process adequately in writing, that satisfies me also. You ask about the effect of my work on others. If my works are ironical, that is a masculine question. Men always want to be terribly influential, but I see that as somewhat external. Do I imagine myself being influential? No. I want to understand. And if others understand in the same sense that I have understood, that gives me a sense of satisfaction, like feeling at home. And this is all fine and dandy until you do things with words. And whether you seek to understand or not, if you write something and something gets read, you are doing something. You are not outside of the. You can say that she can say that. She will be quoting regardless. She will do stuff regardless. She did things with her words. With her understanding, she did things, whether she wanted to do them or not. So this is a matter of interpretation. In literal, like Roland Barthes, no, Roland Barthes, Karl Barth, letterario romani, Roland Barthes, Topi Barth. In that sense. So she has effect on others, regardless. It's a mystery. We all have effect on others with our words, regardless of whether we want to or not. Even if you explicitly say, I don't want to have effects on others, you are still doing that. because you spoke, because you wrote, because you published. She really wanted nothing. If she really wanted to not have effect on others, explicitly, just don't publish. Don't do interviews. Don't write anything. I mean, probably she's ironic and I'm not getting that. Gauss, do you write easily? Do you formulate ideas easily? Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. But in general, I can tell you that I never write until I can, so to speak, take detection from myself. Until you have already thought it out. Yes, I know exactly what I want to write. I do not write until I do. Usually I write it all down only once, and then goes relatively quickly since it really depends on how fast I type. Gauss, your interest in political theory, in political action and behavior is at the center of your work today. In this light, what I found in your correspondence with Professor Schocken seems particularly interesting. Though you wrote, if I may quote you, that you were interested in your youth neither in politics, nor in interest. Miss Arendt, as a Jew, you emigrated from Germany in 1923. You were then 26 years old. Is your interest in politics, the cessation of your indifference to politics in history, connected to these events? Yes, of course. Indifference was no longer possible in 1923. It was no longer possible even before that. For you as well? Yes, of course. I read the newspaper intently. I had opinions. I did not belong to a party, nor did I ever need to. By 31, I was firmly convinced that the Nazi would take the hand. I was always arguing with other people about it, but I did not really concern myself systematically with these things until I emigrated. I have another question about what you just said. If you were convinced that the Nazis could not be stopped from taking power, didn't you feel impelled actively to do something to prevent this? For example, join a party, or did you no longer think that made sense? I personally did not think it made sense. If I thought so, it is very difficult to say all this in retrospect. Perhaps I would have done something. I thought it was hopeless. Is there a definite event in your memory that dates your turn to be political? I would say February 27, 1923, the burning of the Reichstag and the illegal arrest that followed in the same night, the so-called protective custody. And people were taken to Gestapo, cellars, or to concentration camps, whatever by things that happened later. This was an immediate shock for me, and from that moment on, I felt responsible. That is, I was no longer of the opinion that one can simply be a bystander. I tried to help in many ways, but what actually took me out of Germany, if I should speak of that, I never thought it because it is of no consequence. I intended to emigrate anyhow. I thought immediately the Jews would not stay. I did not intend to run around Germany as a second-class citizen, so to speak, in whatever form. In addition, I thought that things would just get worse and worse. Nevertheless, in the end, I did not live in such a peaceful way. And I must say that gives me a certain satisfaction. I was arrested, and then I had to leave the country legally, and that was instant gratification for me. I thought at least I had done something. At least I am not innocent. No one could say that of me. The Zionist organization gave me this chance. I was a close friend with one of the leading people, above all with the then president, Karl Blumenfeld. But I was not a Zionist, nor did the Zionists try to convert me. Yet in certain sense I was influenced by them, especially by the self-criticism that the Zionists spread among the Jewish people. I was influenced in political and nothing to do with Zionists. Now in 1933, Blumenfeld and someone whom you do not No approached me and said, "We want to put together a collection of all anti-Semitic statements made in ordinary circumstances. For example, settling clubs, all kind of professional clubs, all kind of professional journals. In short, the sort of thing that doesn't become known in foreign countries." To organize such a collection at that time was to engage in what the Nazis called oral propaganda. No Zionists could do this, because if he were found, the whole organization would be exposed. They asked me, "Will you do it?" And I said, "Of course." I was very happy. First of all, it seemed a very intelligent idea to me, and second, it gave me the feeling that something could be done after all. Were you arrested in connection with this work? Yes, I was found out. I was very lucky. I got out after 8 days because I made friends with the official who arrested me. He was a charming fellow. He'd been promoted from criminal police to a political division. He had no idea what to do. What was he supposed to do? He kept saying to me, "Ordinary, I have someone there in front of me, and I just check up the file, and I know what's going on. But what shall I do with you?" That was in Berlin? That was in Berlin. Unfortunately, I had to lie to him. I couldn't let the organization be exposed. I told me tall tales, and he kept saying, "I'll got you in here, I shall get you out again. Don't get a lawyer, Jews don't have any money now. Save your money." Meanwhile, the organization had got me a lawyer, through members of course, and I sent this lawyer away, because this man who arrested me had such an open, decent face. I relied on him, and thought that there was a much better chance that with some lawyer who himself was afraid. "And you got out and could leave Germany?" "I got out, but I had to cross the border illegally. My name had not been cleared." In the correspondence we mentioned, Miss Arendt, you clearly rejected a superfluous Scocken's warning that you should always be mindful of your solidarity with Jewish people. You wrote, and I quote again, "To be a Jew belongs for me to the indubitable facts of my life, and I never wanted to change anything in my childhood." I'd like to ask a few questions about this. You were born in 1906 in Hanover as the daughter of an engineer and grew up in Königsberg. Do you remember what it was like for a child in pre-war Germany to come from a Jewish family? I couldn't answer that question truthfully for everyone. And as for my personal recollection, I did not know from my family that I was Jewish. My mother was completely irreligious. Your father died young. My father died young. It all sounds very odd. My grandfather was the president of the liberal Jewish community and a civil official in Königsberg. I came from an old Königsberg family. Nevertheless, the word Jew never came up when I was a small child. I first met a within two anti-Semitic grown-ups. They are not worth repeating, for children in the street. After that I was, so to speak, enlightened. Was that a shock for you? No. Did you have the feeling, now I am something special? That is a different matter. It wasn't a shock for me at all. I thought to myself, that is how it is. Did I have the feeling that I was something special? Yes. But I could no longer unravel that for you today. In what way did you feel special? Objectively, I am of the opinion that it was related to being Jewish. For example, as a child, I knew that I looked Jewish. I looked different from other children. I was very conscious of that. But not in a way that made me feel inferior. That was just how it was. Then too, my mother, my family home, so to speak, was a bit different from the usual. There was so much that was special about it, even in comparison with the homes of other Jewish children or even other children who were related to us, that it was hard for a child to figure out what was special. I would like some elucidation as to what was special about your family home. You say that your mother never deemed it necessary to explain your solidarity with Jewishness to you until you met up with it on the street. And your mother lost the sense of being Jewish when you claimed for yourself in your entry to school. Did it play a role for her? Was she successfully assimilated, or did she at least believe so? My mother was not a very theoretical person. I do not believe that she had any special idea about this. She herself came out of the social democratic movement, out of the circle of socialist Monastetten, a well-known German journal of the time, as did my father. The question did not play a role for her. Of course she was a Jew. She would never have baptized me. I think she would have boxed my ears right and left if she had found out that I denied being a Jew. It was unthinkable, so to speak, out of the question. But the question was naturally much more important in the 20s, when I was young, than it was for my mother. And when I was grown up, it was much more important for my mother than in her life. But that was due to external circumstances. I myself, for example, don't believe that I've ever considered myself a German in the sense of belonging to the people as opposed to being a citizen, if I might make the distinction. I remember discussing it with Jaspers around 1930. He said, "Of course you are German." I said, "One can see that I'm not." But that didn't bother me. I didn't feel that it was something inferior. That wasn't the case at all. And to come back again to what was special about my family home. All Jewish children encountered anti-Semitism, and it poisoned the souls of many children. The difference with us was that my mother was always convinced that you mustn't let it get to you. You have to defend yourself. When my teacher made anti-Semitic remarks, I was told to get up immediately, leave the classroom, come home, and report everything exactly. Then my mother wrote one of her many registered letters, and for me the matter was completely settled. I had a day off from school, and that was marvelous. But when it came from children, I was not permitted to tell about it at home. That didn't count. You defend yourself against what came from children. Thus this matter was never a problem for me. There were rules of conduct by which I retained my dignity, so to speak, and when I was protected, absolutely protected, at home. You studied in Marburg, Heidelberg, and Freiburg with Professor Heidegger, Bultmann, and Jaspers, with a major in philosophy and minors in theology and Greek. How did you come to choose these subjects? I often thought about that. I can only say that I always knew I would study philosophy, ever since I was 14 years old. Why? I read Kant. You can ask, why did you read Kant? That's not a question. I read Kant. It's self-explanatory, tautological, and always a good thing. For me, the question was somehow, I can either study philosophy or I can drown myself, so to speak. But not because I didn't love life. No, as I said before, I had this need to understand. The need to understand was there very early. You see, our books were in the library at home. One simply took them from the shelves. Besides, Kant, do you remember special experiences in reading? Yes, first of all, psychology, the Weltanschauung, published, I believe, in 1920. I was 14, and then I had Kierkegaard and that fit together. Is that what theology came in? Yes, they fit together in such a way that for me, they both belong together. I examine the givings only as how one deals with this if one is Jewish, how one proceeds. I had no idea, and difficult problems that were then resolved by themselves. Greek is another matter. I always loved Greek poetry, and poetry has played a large role in my life. So I chose Greek in addition. It was the easiest thing to do, since I read it anyway. I'm impressed. No, you exaggerate. Your intellectual gift was so early, Miss Allen. Did you sometimes separate you as a scholar and as a young student from the usual day-to-day relationship, painfully perhaps? That would have been the case if I didn't know about it. I thought everybody was like that. When did you realize you were wrong? Rather late. I don't want to say how late. I am embarrassed. I was indescribably naive. That was part due to my bringing up home. Grades were never discussed. That was taken to be inferior. Any ambition was taken to be inferior. In any case, the situation wasn't at all clear to me. I experienced it sometimes as a sort of strangeness among people. A stranger which you believe came from you? Yes, exclusively. But that has nothing to do with talent. I never connected it with talent. Was the result sometimes disdain from others in their youth? Yes, that happened very early. And I have often suffered because I felt such disdain, that is, knowing one really shouldn't and one really must not, and so forth. When you left Germany in 1933, you went to Paris, where you worked in an organization that tried to provide for Jewish youngsters in Palestine. Can you tell me something about that? Parigi nel 1933? Okay. This organization brought Jewish youngsters between 13 and 17 from Germany to Palestine and housed them there in kibbutzim. For this reason, I really know those settlements pretty well. And from a very early period. At this time I had a lot of respect for them. The children received vocational training. Sometimes I also smuggled in Polish children. It was a regular social work, educational work. There were large camps in the country where the children were prepared for Palestine, where they also had lessons, where they learned farming, and where they, above all, had to gain weight. We had to clothe them from head to foot. We had to cook for them. Above all, we had to get papers from them, and we had to deal with the parents, and before everything else, we had to get money for them. That was also largely my job. I worked together with French women. That is more or less what we did. Do you want to hear how I decided to take on this work? Please. You see, I came out of a purely academic background. In this respect, the young 33 made a very lasting impression on me. First a positive one, and then a negative one. Perhaps I'd better say first a negative one and then a positive one. People often think today that German Jews were shocked in 33 because Hitler assumed power. As far as I and people of my generation are concerned, I can say that it was a curious misunderstanding. Naturally, Hitler's rise was very bad, but it was political, it wasn't personal. We didn't need Hitler's assumption of power to know that Nazis were our enemies. That had been completely evident for at least 4 years to everyone who wasn't feeble-minded. We also knew that a large number of German people were behind them. They could not shock us to surprise us in 33. You mean that the shock in 33 came from the fact that events went from generally political to the personal? Not even that. Of that too. First of all, the generally political became a personal fate when one emigrated. Second, friends coordinated or got in line. The personal problem, was not that our enemies did what our friends did. No, was not what our enemies did, but what our friends did. In the wave of coordination, Gleichschaltung, non eccello in tedesco, refers to the widespread giving in at the outset of the Nazi era to the changed political climate in order either to secure one's position or to get employment. In addition, it is described as Nazi policy of converting traditional organization into Nazi organization. Which was relatively voluntary, in any case not yet under the pressure of terror. It was as if an empty space formed around me. I lived in an intellectual milieu, but I also knew other people. And among the intellectuals, coordination was the rule, so to speak. But not among the others, and I never forgot that. I left Germany dominated by the idea, of course somewhat so exaggerated, never again. I shall never again get involved in any kind of intellectual business. I want nothing to do with that lot. I also didn't believe them. That Jews and German Jewish intellectuals would have acted any differently had their own circumstances been different. That was not my opinion. I thought that it had to do with their profession, with being an intellectual. I'm speaking as past tense. Today I know more about this. I do not still believe this in the same degree. But I still think that it belongs to the essence of being an intellectual that one fabricates ideas about everything. No one ever blames someone if he coordinated because he had to take care of his wife and child. The worst thing was that some people really believe in Nazis for a short term, many for a very short term. But that means that they made up ideas about Hitler, in part terrifically interesting ideas, completely fantastic and interesting and complicated things far above the ordinary level. I found that grotesque. Today I would say that they were trapped by their own ideas. That is what happened. But then, at the time, I didn't see it so clearly. And that was the reason that it was particularly important for you to get out of intellectual circles and start to do work of a practical nature? Yes. The positive side is the following. I realized that I then express I will not finish this now. Time and time again in the sentence, if one is attacked as a Jew, one must defend oneself as a Jew. Not as a German, not as a world citizen, not as a upholder of the right of man, or whatever. But what you can specifically do as a Jew. Second, it was now my clear intention to work with an organization. For the first time, to work with a Zionist. They were the only one who were ready. It would have been pointless to join those who were assimilated. Besides, it never really had anything to do with them. Even before this time, I concerned myself with the Jewish question. The book on Rahel Hagen was finished when I left Germany. The problem with the Jews plays a role in it. I wrote it with the idea I want to understand. I wasn't discussing my personal problem as a Jew, but now belonging to Judaism has become my own problem, and my own problem was political, purely political. I wanted to go into practical work, exclusively and only Jewish work. With this in mind, I then looked for work in France until 1940. Yes. Then, during the Second World War, you went to the United States, where you are now a professor of political theory, not philosophy, in Chicago. You live in New York. Your husband, whom you married in 1940, is also a professor of philosophy in America. The academic community, of which you are again a member, after the disillusionment of 1933, is international. Yet I should like to ask you whether you miss the Europe of the pre-Hitler period, which will never exist again. When you come to Europe, what in your impression remains and what is irrevocably lost? The Europe of later? I do not long for that, I can tell you. What remains? The language remains. And that means a great deal to you? A great deal. I always consciously refuse to lose my mother tongue. I always have maintained a certain distance from French, which I then spoke very well as from English, which I write today. I write in English, but I never lost a feeling of distance from it. There is a tremendous difference between your mother tongue and another language. For myself, I can put it extremely simply. In German, I know the rather large part of German poetry by heart. The poems are always somehow in the back of my mind. I can never do that again. I do things in German that I would not permit myself to do in English. That is something I do them in English too, because I have become bold, but in general I've maintained a certain distance. The German language is the essential thing that has remained, and that I always consciously preserved. And it's so ironic that I'm reading this and... okay. Even in the most bitter time, always, I thought to myself, what is one to do? It wasn't the German language that went crazy. And second, there is no substitution for the mother tongue. People can forget the mother tongue. That's true, I've seen it. There are people who speak the new language better than I do. I still speak with a very heavy accent, and I often speak unidiomatically. They can all do this thing correctly, but they do them in a language in which one cliché chases another, because the productivity that one has in one's own language is cut off when he forgets that language. The case in which mother tongue was forgotten, it is the impression that it was the result of repression? Yes, very frequently. I have seen it in people as a result of shock. You know, what was decisive was not the year 33, or at least not for me. What was decisive was the day we learned about Auschwitz. It was in 43. At first we didn't believe it. Although my husband and I always said we were expected anything from that bunch, but we didn't believe this because militarily it was unnecessary and uncalled for. My husband is a former military historian. He understands something about these matters. He said, don't be gullible. Don't take these stories at face value. They can go that far, and then a year later we believed it after all, because we had the proof. That was the real shock. Before we said, well, one has enemies, that is entirely natural. Why shouldn't people have enemies? But this was different. It was really as if an abyss had opened. Because we had the idea that amends could somehow be made for anything else, as amends can be made for just about everything at some point in politics. But not for this. This ought not to have happened. And I don't mean just the number of victims. I mean the method, the fabrication of corpses, and so on. I don't need to get into that. This should not have happened. Something happened to which we cannot reconcile ourselves. None of us ever can. About everything else that happened, I have to say that it was sometimes rather difficult. We were very poor, we were hungered down, we had to flee. By hook or by crook, we somehow had to get through, and whatever. That's how it was. But we were young, and I even had a little fun with it, I can deny it. But not this. This was something completely different. Personally, I could accept everything else. How are your opinions about post-war Germany, which you often visited and in which your most important works have been published, have changed since in 1945? I returned to Germany for the first time in 1949 in the service of a Jewish organization for the recovery of Jewish cultural treasures, mostly books. I came with very good will. My thoughts after 45 were as follows. Whatever happened in 23 is really unimportant in light of what happened after that. Certainly, the disloyalty of friends, to put it bluntly for once. But if someone really became a Nazi and wrote articles about it, he did not have to be loyal to me personally. I did not speak to him again anyhow. He didn't have to get in touch with me anymore because as far as I was concerned, he had ceased to exist. That much is clear. But they were not all martyrs, they were people who fell into their own trap, as I would say today. Nor did they desire what came later. Does it seem to me that there should be a basis for communication precisely in the abyss of Auschwitz? And that was true in many personal relations. I agree with people and not particularly agreeable, nor I am very polite to say what I think. I say what I think. But somehow things were set straight again with a lot of people. As I said, all these were only people who were committed to Nazis for a few months, otherwise for a few years, neither murder nor informers. People, as I said, who made up ideas about Hitler, but in general, and the great experience when one returns to Germany, is one of violent emotion. And there was the experience of hearing German spoken in the street. For me, that was indescribable joy. Today, now that things are back on track, the distance I feel has become greater than it was before when experienced in that highly emotional state. Visco's condition work here got back on track too quickly, in your opinion? Yes, and often on a track to which I do not assent. But I don't feel responsible for that. I see it from the outside now. And that means I'm far less involved than I was at that time. That could be because of the lapse in time. Listen, 15 years are not nothing. You have become much more indifferent, distant. Indifferently too strong, but there is a distance. Pausing. Stop. Next another time. People are complicated, but if there is one thing that we do, is being shaped by the start of our life so much that you can literally see the lines between parents, education, your past life when you were 10, your decision, what you did, everything piles up. I am in my hometown, in the house I grew up in. And I mean, there is a series of events, personal stuff, but basically, I live in a house where everything is being bought or is connected with something, an emotion. In a particular place in my personal history, in a particular time in my history, where everything has a spot, an emotional spot. You could do emotional archaeology in this house. And I mean, it's the first years, right? You don't remember how you were treated when you were 4, but you are. There's also that. I always found that very, very that I have emotional reactions, intellectual curiosity, that all depend on books and events that probably happened when I was 4 or 3. I know that's the nature of what we are as humans, how we are formed, but it's scary. Because I am responsible for myself, I am a result of something that I could not have any degree of power over. I don't know. Instead, we now live in a society in Italy where we are so immersed in something that can be described as illiberal intellectual discourse that, I mean, how do you react to that? What do you do? What are the actions? When people act as if the state is their king, asking for something and obeying. When we have a president, uh, a prime minister, a president that says nothing, and we have a prime minister that kept regulating through a pandemic without governing, but through arbitrary decisions that made no sense and were based on data that were not shown nor made public. We are used to that, and we have factions on what to do, but we don't ask accountability. We don't require accountability because we don't want to be held accountable. We don't require nor ask accountability to our elected officials. There is no measurement. And so, what we have is not democracy. What is the limit? What is the slippery slope? Is there a Zeno question where is the tipping point between a democracy and democracy? Oligarchy? And I don't know. I'm very confused because against an arbiter that doesn't explain his decision nor involves people in his decision nor can be held accountable, then you don't have to follow his rules. You know? I don't have to follow what Conte says. It doesn't explain why. It doesn't give a reason. It says because it says so, but what fuck off. But at the same time, unreasonable to follow some rules regarding COVID, and you do that. You test before flight, you take precautions, but do you take precautions because a guy tells you? Or because you need to? It is a collective effort to stay sane, or is this obeying the rules that someone made? There are two very different things, even if the results are the same. The first is a democracy, the second is not. So we are in this weird situation. And a lot of it, a lot, depends on this political relationship the citizen in Italy we have with